Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei and Android 21 were childhood freind and harem? If you like to hear uncensored version of this and other stories, then I'll give you link of my Patreon. Go support and follow the Myth 0s216 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. In the sacred world of the Kais, a battle was raging. The Z warriors were in their final battle to defeat Android 21, evil, and stop the waves that were suppressing their powers. She was putting up a decent fight, but with so many fighters against her, she was quickly being overtaken. But she had amazing regenerative abilities to compensate, making it anyone's guess who would come out on top. Eventually they had come up with a plan, and Android 21, good, was now holding her off one-on-one. They clashed for some time, eventually locking their wrists against each other in a bid to overpower the other. "I can't believe this. What are you doing? Get out of my way," said Android 21, evil. "Goku, what's the holdup?" yelled Android 18. Goku, who was charging energy for his spirit bomb, had finally gathered enough to use. "Thanks everyone. I'm all good to go," he said. 21, yelled Android 18. "I know." "Ha!" said Android 21, good, as she broke the wrist lock and fired a key blast at point-blank range. "What?" said Android 21, evil, not expecting it. After firing the shot, Android 21, good, jumped back. "This way." "Hurry," said Android 18. Android 21, evil, was covering her face from the blast. She swiped her arm to dissipate the smoke around her, only to stare in shock at the spirit bomb about to be thrown at her. "Now, Goku!" shouted Android 18. "Okay, here it goes. Spirit boom!" he yelled as he launched his attack. "You can't ever stop me!" screamed Android 21, evil, as she reached out to stop the oncoming attack. The attack reached her, and she was holding it back with everything she had. Goku was struggling to push the attack forward. "Ugh! I can't believe that wasn't enough," said Android 17, annoyed. "You gotta be kidding me," said Vegeta, also irritated. "But we've used up all our power," said Krillin, worried. "Goku, it's up to you," said Piccolo. "Damn it," said Android 18, vexed. Android 21, good, looked down in front of her, making a decision. 18, please take care of the other soul inside of me. I owe them a great deal," she said sadly. "Huh?" said Android 18, confused. A ball of light came out of Android 21, good, and entered Android 18. "Thank you and goodbye," said Android 21, good, sadly but with a soft smile. 21? exclaimed Android 18 as Android 21, good, charged toward her evil counterpart. She flew under the spirit bomb that Android 21, evil, was holding, catching her off guard. "You can't!" shouted Android 21, evil. "We're going to disappear together," yelled Android 21, good, as she tackled her evil self. Since she was no longer holding back the spirit bomb, it moved forward and consumed both 21s. 21! shouted Android 18 as the spirit bomb detonated in a flash of light. Where am I?" asked 21, good, as she felt like she was floating in a black void. "Didn't I die?" She was confused why she was still supposedly alive. But eventually a light shone, and she was blinded. It took some time for her vision to adjust, and when she could finally see, she found herself in someone's arms with two faces looking down at her happily. "Congratulations, she's a girl," said a man in a white coat off to the side. 21, good, tried to assess the situation she was in as she looked around at her surroundings. From what she could see, she seemed to be in a hospital room. She looked down at her own body and saw she was a newborn. Finally, she put two and two together. "I've been reincarnated? Why, was an artificial being. I shouldn't be able to reincarnate, right?" She didn't know enough about being reborn to come to a definitive conclusion. As she was trying to wrap her head around the situation, her new parents were speaking. "What should we name her?" asked the woman. This got 21's attention. The idea of having a real name instead of a designation made her feel happy. "How about Vomi?" said the man. "Vomi, why does that name sound familiar?" She couldn't shake the feeling of familiarity. "That sounds wonderful." "Hello, Vomi. I'm your mother," said the woman with a caring smile. A feeling of happiness welled up in Vomi, and she unintentionally laughed and reached for her mother's hand, grabbing it. Both parents looked at their child happily. As she was coming to terms with her situation, she came to a decision. I now have a chance to live a life of my own. I don't know what caused all this to happen, but I will use this new chance to live a better life of my own choosing. I will help people instead of hurting them, I swear it. She thought to herself. It was morning and Vomi Issei was currently making his way to school. He yawned tiredly as he was up late last night watching some videos he borrowed from Matsuda. As he tiredly trudged his way to school, he felt someone poke his shoulder. He looked over it to see his childhood friend Vomi happily smiling at him. Morning, Issei. Up late again? She greeted with a sly smile. Hey Vomi. Yeah, I was watching something Matsuda lent me and I lost track of time, he said, slightly embarrassed. Vomi chuckled at her friend's antics. She was more than well aware of Issei's usual activities, but she didn't really care. After all, there was more to Issei than just the kind of women he liked. The pair walked to school together like they normally did and were eventually joined by Matsuda and Motohama. Hey you two, walking together as usual, teased Matsuda. What did you expect from the childhood couple, teased Motohama. Shut up guys, it's not like that, said Issei a bit shyly. Vomi just had a nice smile on her face as they all arrived at school. School went on as it normally did. Vomi was considered a genius in the school, with an intelligence that rivaled the student council president Sona. Because of that, the two had formed a respectful rivalry in terms of trying to have the best grades in the school. Due to her intelligence and the fact that she always wore a lab coat over her uniform, the students of the school playfully nicknamed her Dr. Vomi, believing that she would one day become a famous doctor. On top of that, she was found beautiful by most students, with looks that they described as rivaling the two great Wani-samas of the school, Rias and Akino. The one thing that confused the students was Vomi's closeness with Issei, a member of the perverted trio. People knew that they were childhood friends, but whenever it came to Issei, Vomi was really attached to him. She seemed completely unbothered by her friend's preferences, and happily chatted with him as well as the other two of the perverted trio. It baffled the other students, but that just made her seem like an angel to them who was willing to be friends with everyone. After the last bell rang, Issei and Vomi were walking down the hallway getting ready to leave school. Hey Issei, do you want to come to my place? She asked. Maybe later. The other two said they wanted to talk to me about something. Where are they anyways? Dunno, but I have an idea, he said while looking away. Vomi knew what he was thinking and had a wry smile. Want me to come with you? No you don't have to, he said nervously. If I go with you, I can vouch for you when the kendo girls inevitably try to attack you, she said wryly. Issei made a slightly guilty face seeing as she saw right through him. He nodded his head and the two headed off to the kendo club area. The two chatted like normal until they reached the clubroom. When Issei looked around, his friends were nowhere to be seen. Guess they weren't here, he said. Alright, where do we look next? Maybe by the track behind the school. Alright then, let's go, she said cheerfully. The two began to walk away from the clubroom when Vomi suddenly stopped. She quickly extended her hand and caught something that was about to be brought down on the back of Issei's head. Issei was surprised by the sudden movement, and turned to see Vomi had caught a bakken that was about to hit him, being held by Murayama. What do you think you're doing? Asked Vomi in a low tone that made even Issei shiver. Why are you stopping me? He was peeking on us earlier, said Murayama. That is false, as he was with me the entire time after classes got out. She glared at the girl, causing her to back off. The other kendo girls were there too, with their bakken looking ready to join in until they saw Vomi's expression. That aside, what gives you the right to attack him? Last time I checked, it was the staff and the student council's job to deal with problematic students. Should I report you to the student council for attempting to harm another student? She said harshly. That question made their blood run cold, as some of them even dropped their bakken in an attempt to try and look innocent. Kates, who was standing behind Murayama, spoke next. Why are you defending him? Even if he is your childhood friend, as a girl you should understand. What I understand is that you girls are shallow and quick to jump to conclusions based on your feelings. As I said before, Issei was with me the entire time. We only came here because Issei thought that the other two might be here, which they're not. So we were about to be on our way when you so callously tried to assault an innocent person. I don't care what you think of him, but don't think for a second that I'm just gonna stand by and let you hurt my friend." She interrupted her and completely shut down her argument. Vomi turned and gestured to Issei. "We're leaving." "Why, yes, ma'am," said Issei, a bit shaken. He was grateful to Vomi, but knew not to make her more upset when she's like this. With that, the two left, leaving behind a group of scared girls. After walking in silence for a bit, Issei nervously spoke. "Vomi, are you all right?" "I'm fine, why do you ask?" she said in her usual cheerful tone, as if none of what happened earlier happened. It was a bit unsettling to Issei how she could quickly change gears like that, but he was grateful for it this time. "You saved me again, thanks. Although I feel a little pathetic to keep getting saved by you," he said self-loathingly. "Don't say that. Don't forget that you saved me when we were kids all those years ago. Not just me, but Irina too. We both owe you," she said, a bit nostalgic at the memory. "Yeah, I wonder how she's doing right now," said Issei, also nostalgically reminiscing. The two were lost in a good atmosphere when suddenly they were interrupted by a girl coming to meet them. Her name was Yuma Amano. She had transferred here a few weeks ago and was a big hit with the other students. There was something about her that made Vomi uncomfortable, but she wasn't sure what it was. Excuse me, Issei-san." Issei was shocked she was talking to him. So much so he looked around to make sure there wasn't someone else named Issei there before pointing to himself. "Yes, you. I was wondering, would you go out with me?" she asked nervously. Both Issei and Vomi were stunned by the confession. Issei was doubting if this was reality, while Vomi didn't know how she felt about this situation. Issei looked at Vomi as if to gauge what she was thinking, but when Vomi looked at him, she just had a blank expression. He eventually looked back at Yuma and answered, If you're okay with me, then yeah." "Great. Then can we go on a date this weekend?" she said excitedly. "Sure, sounds good. I will meet you downtown on Saturday." "Okay. I'll be waiting," she said as she ran off. Issei was feeling a mix of emotions. He had never been asked out before and felt really excited, but at the same time he couldn't help but keep thinking what Vomi was thinking. "Vomi, I can't believe I got asked out," said Issei excitedly, but also gauging what Vomi thought. "Congratulations, Issei. I hope things work out," she said with a smile, but Issei could tell something was up. "Vomi, what's wrong?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried to deny. "Vomi," said Issei in a knowing tone. Vomi sighed before speaking. "There was something about her. It just gave me a bad feeling is all. Don't worry about it. I don't want to ruin your chance." Issei grabbed Vomi's hand, surprising her. "If you say not to go, I won't," he said with a serious look. Vomi was surprised, but she took a deep breath as she looked at Issei. "You should go. I don't want to hold you back," she said with a smile. Issei stared at her for a moment, but nodded his head. "Okay, thanks, no problem," she said. She still felt uneasy but was determined to support her friend. Although she couldn't understand what this pain in her chest was. It was Saturday, and Vomi was out on the town. She couldn't sit still at home, and since she knew Issei was out today, she decided to try and find something to do. Although deep down she knew she was only doing this hoping to run into Issei. She could just walk to him. She knew what his energy felt like, being able to still sense ki since she reincarnated, but if she did that, she knew Issei would know she went after him, and she didn't want to get in the way. So she decided to go to her favorite sweets shop and pig out on some sweets. She still kept her sweet tooth from her previous life, and despite how much she ate, she never gained weight or developed cavities. Part of her thought that maybe some of her old powers came with her when she reincarnated, which worried her since she knew how dangerous it could be if she lost control. So, over the years she did minimal training to keep herself under control, while also not gaining too much power that she couldn't control it. As she ate her snacks, she mused about something she had been thinking about for years. Should I train Issei in everything the others taught me? Issei is always worried about protecting me and always being protected, so maybe I should teach him a few things. If he works out, he'll be able to attract more girls like he wants. Maybe that girl he's always talking about would look his way finally. What was her name? Rias Gremory or something like that, she was sarcastically thinking to herself. She knew who Rias was, there wasn't anyone at Ko who didn't. She had a very distinct personality, not to mention her crimson red hair. Whenever Issei saw her, it was like he was in a trance. She would never admit it, but it made her jealous that Issei didn't act like this with her. But that aside, there was something that rubbed her the wrong way. It wasn't just her, there were several people in the school who gave her an unsettling feeling, and she figured out that what she was sensing was magic, and not ki. She was familiar with it thanks to her Bu cells, so she was familiar with magic as well as the data she got about Babidi. She wasn't sure what their connection was to it, but she was steadily working on finding out. She felt that from Yuma as well, but unlike the others, she felt something unsettling about her. But she hoped it was just her imagination. She paid for the food and exited the shop. It had gotten late, and she was about to head home when something caught her attention. She felt Yuma's power suddenly grow and become darker. This sent alarms off in her head, and she quickly ran to Issei's location. As she was running, she suddenly felt Issei's power start to weaken, causing her to use more power to run faster. She finally made it to Issei, who was in a puddle of blood on the ground with Yuma nowhere to be seen. "Issei!" yelled Vomi as she went to gather him up in her arms. Issei weakly looked up at Vomi and tried to speak. "Vomi," he said weakly before the light started to fade from his eyes. Vomi tried to think of something to do to save him. She knew she had healing magic, but she wasn't practiced with it, but that wasn't gonna stop her from trying. She began using her magic, but it wasn't healing, it was just slowing his death. She was trying and becoming desperate. "No! Issei, I can't lose you! What will I say to Irina?" She was hopelessly trying to bargain for Issei to stay alive, but she was losing him. "No! No!" she screamed as her sadness and rage bubbled up. Her ki began erupting from her, and the ground cracked around her. The ground started shaking around her. Not only here but all of Ko shook from her power, causing windows to crack and break, and things to fall over. A bright flash of light happened, blinding the surrounding area. When the light died down, Vomi looked at herself, and saw that she had managed to transform back into her Majin form. It was the first time she had done so since she reincarnated, and she didn't even know if she would ever be able to again. Now that she had transformed, she was now stronger, and her healing was stronger, but she still was only slowing down his death and not healing him. "Damn it! Why isn't this working?" she yelled in frustration. She kept trying to think of ways to save him when something came to mind. Now that she was in her Majin form, it would be possible for her to absorb him and keep him alive until she found a way to heal him. But what would she say to his parents and the others if he disappeared for a long time? There had to be a better way. Maybe if I use a piece of myself to absorb him, and then create a double with that piece so he can still interact with the world, that will save him. We can work out the details later, she thought to herself. She cut off the end of her tail with her hand and placed it over the hole in Issei's stomach. The pink blob expanded until it completely consumed Issei. Then the wriggling mass started to form Issei's shape until it looked like Issei without any wounds. Issei weakly opened his eyes, but his vision was blurry. "Vomi?" he said before passing out again. Vomi could tell he was safe for now, just exhausted. She didn't have time to dwell on it though, as she sensed more magic power heading their way, no doubt drawn to the area by her burst of power. She quickly grabbed Issei and used instant transmission to teleport them out of there. Rias and her group arrived at the scene where they felt that incredible burst of power. When they got there, they saw all the destruction of the surrounding area. "What happened here?" asked Rias. "It's like somebody dropped 20 tons of steel or something," said Kaneko. Everyone looked around, with Kiba being the first to find something. "Butcho, I found something." The others gathered around him as he knelt down. "Blood? Whose though?" asked Akino. "Could it be Issei-kun's?" They all knew that Issei went on a date with Yuma. They had been keeping an eye on her ever since she entered the school and knew she was a fallen angel. The only conclusion they could come to was that Issei was attacked. But that left them with one question. "Where's the body?" asked Rias. They all looked around but didn't find any sign of it. Meaning that the fallen either took the body or Issei was still alive. "I guess we'll find out if he shows up at school again," said Akino, a bit concerned about the situation. Rias nodded in agreement with her queen. If he does show up, then we'll confront him about what happened here. They all nodded in agreement with their king and decided to head back for the night. Vomi teleported to her room and placed Issei on her bed so he could rest. She sat down on a chair in her room, still in her Magian form, and was figuring out how much of her power had returned. She concentrated, and she could see her cells still remembered all the skills she got from the fighters that made her up. Goku, Vegeta, Frieza, Buu, and others. All their skills and abilities were still there, she could feel it. But as for her power, she was much weaker than she was originally. Makes sense, I have only been minimally training, so my power wouldn't be how it once was. But I can fix that by training regularly again, she thought to herself. She got up and walked to a mirror in her room to look at herself. She felt a bit nostalgic seeing her old self. She paid close attention to her eyes and saw that they were her normal eyes. That's a relief. I don't know what I would have done if she was still a part of me. A chilling thought crossed her mind. Wait, she didn't reincarnate too, did she? She was now worried that she was not alone in this new world. Ah wow, groaned Issei, catching Vomi's attention. She quickly transformed back to normal and sat back in her seat. Issei opened his eyes and blinked a few times, trying to focus his vision. What happened? I was hoping you could tell me, said Vomi. Issei turned his head and saw her sitting there. Vomi? Issei placed a hand on his head. Why are you in my room? Vomi chuckled a bit. Sorry to burst your bubble, but you're in my room, she said with a smile. That comment snapped Issei awake as he sat up and looked around. How did I get here? I brought you here. What is the last thing you remember? Issei thought back and tilted his head. I remember, getting ready for the date. I went out with Yuma and had a good time. We got to the park and then Issei cut off, remembering what had happened finally. She stabbed me, he said in a sad and horrified tone. Vomi was annoyed and a bit jealous when Issei recalled the date, but those were replaced with rage when she heard what happened after. Issei looked downcast. I should have known it was too good to be true. What kind of girl would ever want to go out with a pervert like me? That's not true. You're more than just a pervert, Issei. People just need to take the time to get to know you. What that girl did to you is not your fault. Vomi protested. Issei showed a grateful smile but still looked uncertain. Vomi calmed down a bit before speaking again. Did she say anything before she tried to kill you? She turned into a fallen angel and said that I had a power that was dangerous to their group, so I had to be eliminated. A dangerous power? Vomi thought about it. Even when they were little, she always sensed something faint in Issei, like a power that was asleep and untapped in him, but she didn't pay it any mind. She tried sensing for it again, and she could still feel it just below the surface. So, it wasn't my imagination after all. Damn it, I'd been too careless and got Issei killed for my negligence. As she was lost in thought, something came to Issei's mind. Vomi, how did you save me? Vomi snapped out of her thoughts when he asked. It was now the moment of truth. Well, it's a bit complicated. Would you listen to me for a bit? She asked, a bit nervous. Issei nodded and Vomi told him about herself. About how she reincarnated and the events that led up to it. She then told him that she retained a bit of her power and the potential to regain it. She had the ability to sense energy, and it was because of that she knew that something happened to Issei and came rushing to his side. She tried to save him, but her weakened powers weren't enough. When she thought she was about to lose him, her rage and sadness allowed her to transform and save him. She then transformed and showed him her true form, surprising him. I still wasn't able to heal you, but I stopped you dying by using another method. What method? I have the ability to absorb people into myself, so I absorbed your body and created a copy for you to use until I find a way to heal you. So, your body is attached to that copy, sort of like a life support system. Issei was confused and looked at his own hand. For a moment it turned pink like Vomi's skin before changing back to normal. He was shocked, to say the least. Vomi saw the look on his face and felt a bit guilty. I'm sorry I lied to you all this time, and I'm sorry I didn't stop you when I thought something was suspicious with Yuma. It's my fault this happened to you, she said, starting to tear up. Before she knew it though, Issei embraced her in a hug. It's not your fault, Vomi. You wanted to make me happy and did what you thought was best. Not only that, but when I was on my deathbed you came to my rescue. I owe you everything and I don't blame you for hiding your past from me. I'm just sorry that I'm too weak to do anything. I'm constantly being saved by you, he said sadly. The conversation was going in circles with both Issei and Vomi blaming themselves for what happened, but it wasn't getting them anywhere. Vomi thought for a moment, then came up with something. Hey Issei, do you want to be stronger? Issei looked at her confused. She knew the answer already and continued, since you're currently in a copy of my body, you technically have access to all of my abilities as well. Since I now have regained access to my powers, I was planning on training so that what happened to you doesn't happen again. And since you want to get stronger, why don't we train together and get stronger together? Issei stared at her surprised. See, can I really become stronger? He asked while looking at his hand. Vomi smiled. Not only can you get stronger, but you will also have the potential to be one of the strongest in this universe. The universe? Well, that might be an unfair comparison. I don't know if aliens exist in this universe, so that might just be true because there is nothing else out there, but you would definitely be the strongest in this world, she said excitedly. Issei stared at her some more but seemed to come to a decision. Let's do it! I want to become stronger. Vomi was happy with his response as they stood up. Alright, then let's get started. Grab onto me, she said, extending her hand. Issei took it, and they both teleported away. Issei wasn't used to teleporting, so when he saw his surroundings begin to change, he closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw a white rocky landscape with a completely black sky with stars in the distance. He was confused as to where he was until he turned and was shocked at what he saw. Behind him was the earth, glowing in all its majesty. He finally put two and two together and figured out he was on the moon. So, what do you think of our training ground? Said Vomi telepathically. Issei turned to Vomi and tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then he remembered there was no air on the moon and covered his face trying to not lose air. Vomi found the whole thing comical. You don't have to hold your breath. Since your body is currently a copy of mine, you don't need oxygen. I'm currently talking to you telepathically. Issei released his mouth and saw that he wasn't suffocating, getting a chuckle from Vomi. Issei scratched his head in embarrassment. How did we get to the moon? It's one of my abilities, instant transmission. Basically, I can teleport to wherever I want, although it's more effective if I can sense someone's ki or see where I'm teleporting to. Issei was slightly in awe but shook it off to focus on their task. So, we're here to train? That's right. Even in my weakened state, I have enough power to do some serious damage to the Earth, and now so do you, which is why I brought us to the moon. There is nobody here to worry about, and as long as we don't go too crazy, nothing substantial should happen to the Earth or moon. I hope you're ready, cause the next 2 days are gonna be non-stop training, said Vomi seriously. That weekend Issei and Vomi trained while taking breaks to go home and visit their parents. Issei managed to get home soon after going to the moon for the first time so as not to worry his parents, then told them he was spending the weekend with Vomi. Vomi did the same and told her parents she was spending it with Issei, so the pair had an entire weekend to themselves. In the beginning, Vomi taught Issei how to control ki, which was made easy because since Issei was now a part of Vomi, he too had access to the body's memories of how to use skills and techniques. So training Issei to use everything went by a lot faster than even Vomi anticipated. Once he had gotten down how to use everything, the real training began. The pair exchanged blows and energy blasts while pushing themselves more and more. Issei was getting tossed around at first, since even though he knew how to use techniques, he didn't know how to use techniques. But eventually he started to get it, and his skills and movements became sharper. Then one day during training, Issei and Vomi were exchanging blows, with Vomi overpowering Issei like normal. Issei was starting to get a bit annoyed and was putting more power into his punches, but they were either blocked or dodged by Vomi. Finally, Issei tried to put all his power into one punch and his hand began to glow, catching Vomi's attention. She prepared to block it, and when Issei hit her, she was pushed back quite a bit. When she looked at Issei, she saw that his left hand was now covered in a red gauntlet. Issei was surprised by this too, not knowing what happened. What is this? He asked. Vomi flew over and analyzed it. It wasn't her power, which left only one option. This is probably the thing Yuma tried to kill you over. The power that was a danger to her group. This is the reason she wanted to kill me. He stared at the gauntlet with curiosity. Neither of them knew what it was, but luckily for them, someone did. So you're my new host, spoke the gauntlet in Issei's mind. Wait, what? Said Issei in surprise. Someone is in the gauntlet? Said Vomi, also surprised. How interesting. Someone who can communicate telepathically. Well, it's nice to meet both of you. I'm Drake, one of the two heavenly dragons, the Red Dragon Emperor. The Red Dragon Emperor? Parroted Issei. That's right, and as my host that makes you the Red Dragon Emperor too. Hold on. What is this all about? Asked Vomi. Drake proceeded to explain his origin and about the world of the supernatural. He explained that he is locked in an eternal rivalry with the other heavenly dragon, Albion, the White Dragon Emperor. He told them the destiny of both dragons to fight to the death every time they encounter each other, making both of them realize there is more at stake than just some fallen angel. The two looked at each other. Seems like it was a good idea we started training. So, where are we exactly and what are you training for? Vomi explained what happened with Issei and that they were on the moon to train. We're on the moon? The pair chuckled at the dragon's reaction. Yeah, that was my reaction the first time too, said Issei. Well, since we have awakened you, I guess we should learn what you can do, said Vomi. Drake explained how his abilities worked, and Issei and Vomi were surprised by how useful it was. Wait, that essentially means that Issei has infinite energy. How would you ever lose to the other dragon? I'll accept the praise, but it's more complicated than that. The amount of power a host can use is comparable to what their body can withstand. Use too much, and you explode like a bomb. As for my rival, his powers are opposite of mine, meaning he can take power from others to power himself up. In other words, he is my direct counter. I see, said Vomi. Then we need to give you an advantage outside of just your gear. This training should provide you with the skills and techniques you'll need to beat him. Then let's keep going, said Issei, determined. With that the pair continued their training, now with Issei getting used to his sacred gear. Drake had said that his body was strong enough to manifest more of the gear on him, so by the time training was over Issei had 2 gauntlets and armored greaves on his legs and feet. This upped his defensive and offensive capabilities while also acting like training weights. It was getting close to the end of the day and Vomi and Issei were now sitting next to each other looking up at the earth. This is all so amazing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Yeah, well, you get used to it after a while. The two sat in silence for a bit with Issei thinking over something until he seemed to come to a decision. Vomi, I have something important to ask. What's this all of a sudden? Issei turned to face her fully. Will you go out with me? Vomi froze. She wasn't expecting a confession all of a sudden, although she felt conflicted because she was happy he confessed, but she knew Irina loved Issei since they were kids. She promised Irina to support her in trying to get with Issei, and even after she moved she still wanted to help. But Vomi realized after Issei nearly died that she loved him too and that she was just suppressing her feelings for Irina's sake. I would love to, Issei, but I can't. Why not? Asked Issei in a slightly hurt tone, his voice sounding like that shook her a bit. Because Irina likes you, and I didn't want to get between you two. This was news to Issei. Irina likes me? Yes, I promised to support her, but then she ended up moving away. I wanted to look out for you for her, so that when she came back you would still be the same old Issei. But when Yuma asked you out, I realized that I didn't take your feelings into consideration. I knew how you felt, but when it actually happened I was at a loss for what to do. Not only that, but I found myself getting jealous as well, and I came to realize that I had feelings for you too. But I already promised to support Irina. There was conflict in her voice as she kept going back and forth. Issei made a determined look as he addressed her. If that's the case, then I'll go out with both of you. Vomi was startled a bit at Issei's sudden seriousness, and just stared at him. You know it's been my dream to have a harem of girls whom I love and love me back as well. Vomi, you and Irina are irreplaceable to me. If both of you like me, then I will just take care of both of you. After almost dying I realized that you were always next to me and that I didn't need to wait for someone to come to me. I can't be a man by being passive anymore. I don't want to have any regrets. Vomi was conflicted. She still wasn't sure about all this, but when she looked at Issei, she saw that he meant what he said. Part of her felt silly thinking that Issei would be dissuaded by Irina liking him since she knew he wanted a harem since forever ago. She thought about what he said and saw his serious expression. She didn't want any regrets either. "Alright, I'll go out with you. Starting now, I'm your girl," she said, a mix of embarrassment and her trying to sound seductive. Issei couldn't help but chuckle at the attempt, but he was really happy she said yes. "Thank you, Vomi. I promise I will make you happy." Vomi nodded happily, and the new couple enjoyed their time together watching the earth a bit longer. The next day, Issei and Vomi were walking to school together as usual. What wasn't usual was that Vomi had her arms wrapped around Issei's arm as they walked with her head on his shoulder. The students who saw them had their jaws hanging open at the scene, with some rubbing their eyes making sure it wasn't playing tricks on themselves. Matsuda and Motohama came up behind them as usual, but when they saw that the two were closer than normal, they began berating Issei with questions. Issei and Vomi explained to them that they started going out yesterday, causing the two to cry jealous tears, but they still congratulated them, saying things like, "We knew this would happen one day, but it still makes me envious." The group walked into school with more students getting a glimpse of the scene. The ones who were the most interested were Rias and Akino. "Seems Issei-kun is alive, and even better than we thought," said Akino with a small chuckle. "Should I say, congratulations to them? Everyone always thought they would end up together, so I can't say I'm surprised." "But there's still one issue," said Rias, "the timing. Right, considering he went on a date with the fallen and is now back with his childhood friend, it all seems too suspicious to not be connected. Looks like we'll need to talk to both of them," said Akino, with Rias nodding her head in agreement. Rias continued to watch the pair as they walked to the school, and eventually Rias locked eyes with Vomi. Vomi narrowed her eyes slightly, and Rias had a foreboding feeling suddenly. She realized that they really needed to confront them soon. The school day progressed as it normally did, with the only change being Issei being questioned about his relationship with Vomi by the other students. With the day over, Issei was looking for Vomi, ready to leave to continue their training. As he was walking the halls, he came across someone unexpected. Standing at the end of the hall staring him down was one of the three great One-Isamas of the school, Rias Gremory. Issei was wondering what she was doing here, but soon got his answer as she walked up to him, followed closely by Akino and Kiba. "Issei-kun, could you spare a moment of your time?" asked Rias. Issei was confused about what she wanted with him, but before he could say anything, someone else spoke in his place. "He's busy," said an irritated voice. Issei turned to see Vomi behind him down the hall. "No need to be so cold, Vomi. I actually wanted to talk to you as well." Vomi just glared at the group, with Issei not sure what was going on. Vomi decided to telepathically talk to Issei. "Issei, don't be fooled. These people are similar to Yuma. Try sensing for their magic." Issei's eyes went wide, but he did as he was told. When he felt for it, he could sense what she meant. Once he realized what was going on, he started panicking. What happened to him before flashed in his mind as his breathing became heavier. Everyone noticed this, and Vomi tried to calm him down. "Calm down, Issei. They can't hurt you anymore. Not now that you have my power. Not to mention I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you again," she said comfortingly. With that, Issei began to calm down, but the whole series of events made Rias even more suspicious. "Issei-kun, are you alright? You looked like you were having a panic attack," asked Rias with a bit of worry. "Why, yes, I'm fine. Sorry you had to see that, Rias-senpai," said Issei apologetically. "No, it's fine. As long as you're okay." Rias was trying to get her bearings back after that as Vomi walked up next to Issei. Now that she recollected herself, she started over. "Issei-kun, Vomi, would you two mind accompanying us to our clubroom? There's something I wanted to talk to you about." Issei looked at Vomi, unsure what to do. Vomi was analyzing them as she thought, eventually sighing. "Very well. I'm sure we both have some questions to ask each other," she said, implying that she knew about them. Rias and the others made slightly surprised looks, but then their expressions turned serious as they led them back to the clubroom. Once they arrived at the clubroom, Issei and Vomi sat across from Rias as the others stood around the room. Once everyone was settled, Rias began the meeting. So, I'm sure you both are wondering why I called you here. I'm guessing you want answers about what happened a few days ago, said Vomi. So you do know what happened? I was wondering what happened with the fallen as well as Issei, since when we arrived at the scene there was nothing there but a pool of blood. Vomi noticed something in Rias' statement that caused her to become angry. You knew who she was, and you didn't do anything to stop her? She said, rage obvious in her voice. The others noticed the pressure in the room all coming from Vomi, and Issei was visibly scared of her. We did know she was here, but we couldn't do anything until we were sure she was going to cause trouble, said Rias, trying to defend herself. It seemed to have the opposite effect though. If you had dealt with her when you found out who they were, then Issei wouldn't have nearly died. She yelled while slamming her fist on the table, smashing it. Everyone stared at the broken table, while now being a bit scared of Vomi. Rias forced herself to look back at the enraged Vomi and tried to get some clarification. Wait. What happened exactly? Vomi took a moment to recollect herself and explained what happened to Issei. The boy in question looked away, saddened by remembering what happened. After her explanation, Rias bowed her head. I'm sorry that happened to you, Issei-kun. If I had done something sooner, then you wouldn't have had to go through that. Are you now? Asked Vomi, not buying Rias' supposed unpreparedness. What do you mean? Asked Rias, confused at what she was implying. Vomi rolled her eyes and held up a piece of paper that Rias recognized. This was on Issei's body when I found him. I doubt he brought it with him on his date, meaning he picked it up when he was out. Vomi narrowed her eyes at them. You're telling me you didn't know anything? It's true, I swear. We have our familiars disguise themselves as humans in order to hand out the summoning circles. Issei must have passed one of them and got it. Vomi narrowed her eyes, not buying it. Issei spoke up though. It's true. A random maid with small bat wings handed it to me just before I almost died. That was my familiar, said Rias, summoning a small bat that then transformed into the maid. It's how we get contracts with humans to help increase our power. Vomi huffed, seemingly accepting the explanation. Fine. I'll let this go. So, what do you plan to do about the fallen? Rias made a difficult face. That's a bit more complicated than it would first appear. The three factions are currently in a ceasefire. If anyone acts on any of the groups, it could start the war again. War? Asked both Vomi and Issei, lost about what she was talking about. Rias gave a short explanation about the history of the three factions and the previous war and its consequences. After it was explained, Issei was shocked while Vomi was mulling over the information. After a moment she nodded in understanding. I see. Very well then. If your hands are tied, then it can't be helped. We'll deal with her ourselves. Yourselves? I know you have abilities, but the fallen are not to be underestimated. Not to mention that I doubt there's just one, said Rias in a warning tone. Vomi just brushes it off. Their numbers don't matter. Unless they can erase the town with their own power, then they won't even be a warm-up, Vomi said matter-of-factly. Rias shook her head in disbelief. I know you have some abilities since you were able to help Issei, but don't underestimate the fallen. Vomi gave Rias a look that basically said she was over-exaggerating. I know you don't have any idea about our strength, but I can guarantee that they won't stand a chance. I highly advise against attacking them. Not only could that restart the conflict, but it's also too dangerous, reiterated Rias. Vomi narrowed her eyes at Rias. Then she came up with an idea. All right. How about this? Rias looked at Vomi with interest. Why don't we fight? And you can see for yourself if it's too much for us. Everyone was shocked at Vomi's suggestion. Rias narrowed her eyes at Vomi in return. After a few moments she seemed to nod. Fine, I accept. And if I win you will listen to us. Fine, but if I win, you will tell us everything we want to know, she counter-offered. Deal, Rias agreed. Issei looked nervously between Rias and Vomi, hoping this doesn't end badly. The ORC, Vomi, and Issei were currently in a clearing near the club, with Vomi and Rias standing opposite each other some distance away. Issei was standing beside Akino, Kiba, and Kaneko, looking between the two beauties about to fight. Akino saw Issei looking back and forth and tried to comfort him. Don't worry, Issei-kun. Rias won't hurt Vomi. She just wants to show her how dangerous this situation really is. Issei looked at Akino confused for a moment before realizing she misinterpreted his expression. You got it wrong, Akino-senpai. It's the opposite. I'm worried that Vomi might go too far, especially since she's ticked off right now. Akino's expression turned to surprise, seeing that Issei seemed to be worried for Rias' safety instead of Vomi's. Akino's attention returned to the pair about to face off. Both Rias and Vomi were standing with their arms folded, staring each other down. Are you ready to begin? Asked Vomi. I am if you are. Just don't regret it, said Rias. Vomi showed a vicious smirk. That's my line, she said, unfolding her arms. Rias decided to start. She held back her power considerably but launched a small orb of destruction magic. She and the others were expecting Vomi to dodge, but instead when the attack came close, she simply raised a hand to block the attack. This caused the devils to widen their eyes in shock. Even if it was weakened, destruction magic was still dangerous. The attack connected and a small explosion happened. Vomi! Shouted Rias with worry. The others were worried too, but when they looked at Issei to see his reaction, he seemed calm. This confused them as they looked back at where Vomi was. Once the dust cleared, Vomi was shown unharmed in the same position. Vomi flexed her fingers and put her hand down. How disappointing, don't tell me this is all you got. That got under Rias' skin as she went from shocked to annoyed. Don't get ahead of yourself. I couldn't assume that just because you had abilities that it automatically made you more durable. I didn't want to kill you, so I held back, but don't get overconfident. You haven't seen anything yet. Rias charged multiple orbs of destruction, ready to launch at Vomi. Vomi showed a smile as her right arm glowed. Not long after, a red key blade appeared as Vomi got ready. Rias showed a surprised expression but refocused and launched her attack. Vomi, undeterred, used her blade to cut through every one of the attacks. The orbs passed Vomi as she cut them and exploded behind her. Vomi looked unbothered and eyed the stunned Rias. She quickly dashed at Rias, closing the distance faster than she could react. She got right in front of her, pointing her blade at her throat. Still think I can't handle myself? She asked, in a slightly mocking tone. Rias stared at Vomi, unable to comprehend what had happened. Vomi moved faster than Kiba and cut through her power of destruction like it was nothing. On top of all that, she didn't even look like she was trying at all. Rias now believed Vomi could back up her previous words. But this bothered her. How could someone as strong as you remain hidden for so long? Simple. If I don't want to be found, I won't be, said Vomi in her usual matter-of-fact tone. Rias gave a helpless sigh at that. The others were stunned by the turn of events, with Akino looking at Issei, who was right about his prediction. Issei gave a sigh of relief that Vomi didn't go too far. Back in the clubroom, the group sat back in their spots as Rias and the others gave Issei and Vomi the rundown on the supernatural world and the current standings of various groups. They learned that this town was under Rias and Sona's jurisdiction, and they protected the town from strays and other beings who would cause trouble in town. This info caught Vomi's attention. If this town is under your jurisdiction, then it should be fine for you to take care of the fallen. They're invading your territory. It's more complicated than that, said Rias, but Vomi was unconvinced. No, it isn't. There's something you're not telling us, Rias. Why won't you go after them? Vomi pushed for an answer. Rias had a somewhat guilty look as she looked away. Issei could see it was something personal by her reaction. Vomi, let's leave it at that. I think we should just handle it ourselves. Vomi looked at Issei, seeming to want to argue, but once she looked at his somewhat pleading face, she relented. Fine, I'll drop it, but if you don't intend to do anything, then we're done here, she said, standing up. Issei followed and the two made for the door but were stopped by Rias calling out to them. Wait. What do you intend to do? Isn't it obvious? I'll get rid of them so Issei and I can go back to our normal lives. You know as well as I do that it won't be that simple. I know. But I want to spend my days with the people I care about, so if someone gets in the way of that. She let her key flare as she held her hand up with a key blade forming. I'll make sure they never bother anyone again, she said in a threatening tone. The ORC felt a chill run down their spines at that, Kaneko being the most affected as she backed away. Her power felt similar to Senjutsu, and while Kaneko wasn't an expert in it, she was skilled enough to know that Vomi was no joke. Seemingly satisfied, Vomi walked out followed by Issei. After a few moments to recollect themselves, the ORC began to discuss their next course of action. So, what do we do, Rias? Asked Akino. Rias was in contemplation, not sure what her next move should be. She then noticed Kaneko was slightly shivering in her spot. What's wrong, Kaneko? Are you alright? She asked, concerned. Kaneko suddenly noticed she was shaking and made an ashamed expression before looking at Rias cautiously. Bucho, Vomi's power. It's similar to Senjutsu. Really? Asked Rias, now more interested at possibly figuring out Vomi's abilities. Kaneko nodded. My own ability is limited, but I can tell, her power is overwhelming. The others could see the slight awe in her expression, as she was still trying to contemplate how strong Vomi was. Kiba was now a bit concerned for a different reason. Maybe it's Vomi we should be wary of instead of the Fallen, he suggested. Rias didn't say anything but internally agreed with Kiba. She knew she was dangerous, but that could be helpful if she could convince her to help against Riser. But Vomi, as of right now, viewed her and any supernatural beings with hostility after what happened to Issei. She also seemed to know that she was holding back on helping them for personal reasons rather than because she didn't want to stop the Fallen. How much Vomi knew, Rias was still uncertain of, but she knew Vomi had good intuition, so she chalked it up to that. If that wouldn't work, then her only other option was Issei. She nodded her head as if accepting that as the correct choice. She knew Issei had a crush on her, but after his recent brush with death, he clearly developed a trauma with anything related to the supernatural, if his earlier panic attack was anything to go off of. A part of Rias felt guilty for not preventing that. She always thought Issei was a good person, despite what his reputation at school was. She felt a bit envious that he could so freely express his inner desires without holding back. Although now she could tell that Issei was now meeker than before. In front of others, he seemed normal enough, but the entire time with the ORC, where he would usually be ogling herself or Akino, his gaze only shifted between Vomi and Rias as they talked. His fear has overshadowed his lust. If that's the case, I'll just have to assuage his fear of us, said Rias, finishing her thought out loud. The others were confused at what Rias was talking about. Rias, what are you talking about? Asked Akino. We won't be able to convince Vomi ourselves. Even if we were to act now and take care of the Fallen, she will most likely think we have ulterior motives. Which you do, said Akino, interrupting Rias in a playful tone. Rias gave her queen a small glare before continuing. But if we can convince Issei, he may be able to convince her for us. While I agree with you, how will we do it? Issei seems more afraid of us than before. I kinda miss how he used to look at me with such passion when he saw us before, said Akino. We need to show him that not every supernatural being is out to get him. Because we failed to stop the Fallen from hurting him when we could have, it only makes sense that we help him recover from the trauma that the incident caused. Will Vomi-senpai allow that though? Asked Kiba. We'll just have to talk to Issei when Vomi isn't around, although we'll have to be careful not to scare him. Otherwise we may have the opposite effect, said Rias. The others looked between each other and nodded. Rias let out a sigh before showing a confident smile. Then let's go help Issei-kun. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to support and follow the Myth0s216 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. If you like to hear adult version of this and other stories, I'll give you link of my Patreon. See you in the next video. Goodbye.